Yes, welcome into the camp. Badgers now a little less, well, as we're recording this, a little more than 48 hours out from one of the biggest non-conference games that they've had in perhaps ever. I know, Jesse, you've made that argument that it's right up there, considering Alabama's number 4, and they don't really get a lot of matchups like this, just 2 matchups against ranked teams in the last 20-plus years, or I should say 29 years, because obviously Colorado and Fresno State, but past that, it's been a long time. So getting geared up. You ready for game time yet?
I'm ready. I think I've exhausted about every angle that I could about Wisconsin versus Alabama. So let's finally see what happens when they kick off.
And we will do that, and they will do that. 11 a.m. kick on Saturday morning, Camp Randall Stadium. They're calling for a stripe out. I know we already talked about this. You're wearing black. I think I'll probably obviously be in black as well. But red and white, just depending on where you're going to be. So if you're going to the game and you didn't know that, you can go online and find which section you're in and make sure you're wearing red or wearing white. They're also going to be honoring Ron Dane. Can't wait to see that. Hopefully, for Wisconsin's sake, the game is still a game when that's happening at halftime. That was a little bit of a shot. Shouldn't have been a shot. We'll get to our predictions later on here in the show. But, Jesse, we've done this the first 2 weeks, and I think we should start out with it now as well. What does success look like this week? And this time it's Alabama.
This is, in some sense, a difficult question to answer because I kind of feel like as a program, Wisconsin should not be at a place where if they happen to only lose by 2 touchdowns, it somehow feels like a success. But I can't help but feel like the general sentiment of the fan base is, hey, that will feel sort of good if they can just hang and be in the game. I don't know about you, Zach. I have not heard very many people talking about the possibility that Wisconsin actually wins this game. Certainly not impossible. We've seen much crazier stuff happen. But I look at last year against Ohio State when the Buckeyes were number 3 in the country and they came here and Wisconsin played reasonably well. They were down just 1 score late, ended up losing 24-10. And that felt like a moral victory of sorts, particularly when you consider what happened the previous year when they got their doors blown off in Columbus. But it didn't translate in any way to what we saw next because Wisconsin had a very tough stretch before rallying late. So it's hard for me to sit here and say if Alabama wins 24-10, that it's a success. Maybe if it's a 1-possession game, you'd feel like they're taking steps in the right direction. But ultimately, nobody at Wisconsin came here to just lose close, you know?
I do. And I think, we can point to that Ohio State game because that was the last time that they were a huge underdog at home, and it was a very good team in the top. I think they were in the top 5, and this Alabama team is really good and ranked in the top 5. I think the biggest difference here between the 2 teams is one team was quarterbacked by Kyle McCord, and the other one's quarterbacked by Jalen Milroe. And while Kyle McCord is actually having a really nice season so far at Syracuse, he was a problem in that game. There were some huge mistakes that he made that kept Wisconsin in that game. And I'm wondering if they can replicate that against Jalen Milroe, who brings so much more to the table, especially with his legs.
I mean, this is more akin to when Ohio State would come with insert Heisman Trophy level quarterback.
Justin, you mean at Wisconsin? Yeah.
Like any of the games they've played really in the last
so. JT Barrett had the ability to take off, obviously, certainly Justin Fields. Dwayne Haskins didn't really, but you go back, the last time they came in here that 2010 game with, what's his name? I hate myself for this. The quarterback for Ohio State, the guy that turned into being a wide receiver in the NFL. Ty, what was his name? What was his name? I'm so embarrassed. This is so bad. Terrell Pryor. And, there were a number of guys like that. But the thing with Jalen Milroe is he's a better runner, to be fair, than any of those guys, maybe outside of Justin Fields. But he also has become just an absolute dynamite deep thrower. And while he still does struggle a little bit, some of the intermediate and the short stuff, he's completing 65% of his passes this year. He's averaging over, I think it's like his yards per attempt is like 11 or 12, which is just huge. And Wisconsin has not been tested down the field yet in these first 2 weeks. And I don't know what if they're going to be able to hold up. I mean, we don't know. I think Luke Fickell, when I asked him about it this week, he said, we did a lot of that stuff in the spring and in fall camp with our offense, trying to push the ball down the field. And then you're like, okay, because the offense obviously has not pushed the ball down the field at all, really. But I don't know what that's going to look like. I think Jalen Milroe is one of the better quarterbacks that, at least on paper, that's come in here and played in a long time.
Oh, absolutely. He's hasn't thrown an interception yet. He's got 5 touchdown passes. It certainly helps that they've got a 17-year-old receiver in Ryan Williams who's been dynamic. And he can run like you're talking about. He's got 4 rushing touchdowns. So I don't necessarily know what Wisconsin does here, because can you take away all the weapons at once? They still have 2 very talented running backs who've combined for 4 touchdowns so far as well. I will say, we had a chance to talk to the players on Tuesday night. The guys on defense, they certainly feel like they're ready. One of the things Hunter Wohler talked about is, and again, you can debate the merits of this, he likes the fact that they've handled themselves very well in what he considers to be adverse situations the first 2 weeks, especially late in games in the fourth quarter. And I know we talked about this on the last show. It's hard to make that exact translation to what does it mean if you are successful in adverse situations against so-called lesser programs to what you'll face against Alabama. I think it's another thing that's interesting to me about this in talking to the guys. We know how big of a deal this game is for Wisconsin, but the players know how big of a deal this game is. And I was asking Hunter too, like, when this game was scheduled or announced 5 years ago, 2019, when's the first time you remember hearing about this or talking about this? He remembers talking about this when he was still in high school, about the fact that he might have a chance to play Alabama. And Riley Nowakowski, the same way, guys who are in state who are familiar with this. I wonder what that's going to look like on the field when these guys have built up what this matchup is all about. And yes, they say the preparation's not going to change, but to a man, if you are human, you say this feels different. That's what Hunter said. And whereas on the Alabama side, they've got Georgia in a couple of weeks. And so not to mention everyone else they have to play. I mean, Missouri's 6th in the country and they've got some tough games. So I wonder whether the fact that they will be extra amped up will be better or worse for Wisconsin when this game shows up.
I mean, I think it's going to be a huge matchup, obviously, for Wisconsin. The Wisconsin kids that have been here for an extended period of time, they've known about this game for a long time, as you said. Whether or not they're going to be too amped up, I don't know if they can be too amped up. Like, this is Alabama. This is a huge game. You've obviously made the point about this non-conference, potentially the biggest non-conference game at Camp Randall. So, like, I don't know that you could make too much out of it. And I don't think you're going to struggle with that on defense. I think maybe it comes across offensively where maybe you're a little too hyped up, like Tyler Van Dyke was in the opener, where he kind of, he thought came out with a little extra juice, and he wasn't necessarily settled in, but you have to use that. You have to use that juice because you have to use the juice from the crowd, right? Like to be able to give yourself a little bit of an advantage. This game's at home for, it's a home and home. They get this one. They have to go to Alabama next year. You have to use the advantage, whatever advantage it may be, of your home team. The one thing that we didn't talk about them offensively, certainly a great running game, right? And Jalen Milroe and some talented wide receivers led by Smith. But then that offensive line is a little bit of a question. Now they're expecting to get Caden Proctor back at left tackle, the guy who is from Iowa, went to Alabama, went back to Iowa, and is now back at Alabama. Took some money from Iowa on his way out of town. And he has not played yet this year because of an injury, and he got hurt in I believe, his warm-ups of their opener. So, but he's expected to play, but they've given up a ton of sacks. They got South Florida really had its way with them early on in that game until the fourth quarter, of course. But if I'm Alabama, are you calling back and throwing the ball a lot against Wisconsin?
I'd certainly want to try it. I want to know what Wisconsin's secondary is all about.
You want to know that. You want to know that. Does Alabama need to know that, or do they just do what they see on film and run the ball down Wisconsin's throat?
Well, I think that's the other thing too, is they have every reason to believe they can test Wisconsin in both ways. We've talked ad nauseum here the first 2 weeks about the run defense and the fact that it can be susceptible. If you're getting 6 yards a carry with those two running backs, you don't necessarily have a reason to go deep unless you are in a I don't know, a 3rd and long situation where you feel good if you miss it, you're just going to go for it on 4th and plow through anyway. I think some of it to me will be dictated by what happens in this game. But one of the things that Daryl Peterson said to me this week that I thought was interesting is he said, he described it as Alabama is going to come here and play screw you ball. And I was like, well, what do you mean by that exactly? And he said, they're going to come here thinking they've got the better players and they're going to do whatever they want. And our job is to stop that. And so I thought that was kind of an interesting thing that he had to say.
Yeah, very interesting. You talk about 6 yards of carry. Right now, their leading rusher is averaging 9.7 yards per carry, and their second leading rusher is 8.7 yards of carry. So 6 yards of carry would actually be pretty good. I don't, compared to what they've done here in these first 2 weeks. I'm talking about Alabama, what they've done in the first 2 weeks. But I do think if they do try and pass the ball, though we haven't seen it these first couple of games, can Wisconsin get after the passer? Can they create some havoc for Jalen Milroe while also staying sound enough to not allow him to get out and get out and run? Now he's got 81 yards rushing, but a lot of those yards, he's got more yards rushing than that. All the sack yardage comes out of the rushing total. So he's got more yards rushing than his stats suggest. He's got 4 touchdowns. I mean, Nick Saban took a while to get to this point where he thought you needed a quarterback that could run. And now all of the guys, I feel like that Alabama recruits are guys that can do it both ways. And I know Nick Saban's not there anymore, but Jalen Milroe is the exact type of quarterback that Alabama used to struggle with. And now they saw how all these other teams are doing it. They did it and they became even better. So it's very hard to defend. It's going to be very, very hard to defend, I think.
Yeah. And I wonder what Mike Tressel is going to dial up. Do you put a spy out there because you know what Milroe is capable of doing? If you do that, then are you sacrificing somewhere else? There's no doubt these edge rushers are going to have to do something a little bit more dynamic than what we've seen, because I don't necessarily think you can rely on the defensive line to be making a bunch of plays, even though we did talk about the fact that Elijah Hills has a pair of sacks through the first 2 games. You want to see, frankly, what we saw in the spring and in the preseason, where you had that trio of Leon Lowry, John Pius, Daryl Peterson being able to make significant headway and impact things in the backfield. I don't expect that all the time in a game like this, but you need it in those big moments where maybe it's a 2nd and medium and you get this big sack to force them into a 3rd and long, and it's a little more predictable on 3rd down, so you just give yourself a chance. And that's part of the challenge that they face. They face a challenge at every level of the defense in a way, clearly, that they have not so far.
Yeah, for sure. Other side of the ball, Wisconsin's offense against Alabama's defense, like Wisconsin, like the Badgers, Jake Chaney, Justin Jefferson, one of their linebackers, not going to be able to play the first half due to a targeting call in the second half of their game against South Florida. But for Wisconsin's offense to succeed, what does that look like?
So I'm doing a kind of a 3 keys questions and a prediction story for Friday. And my first question is, can this offense really win with the style of play it's put out here in the first 2 games? And I know we've talked quite a bit about that, these long drives that they've put together. I don't know how that is sustainable against this kind of Alabama defense. I think you're going to have to hit an occasional big one. The challenge, at least in part, is the talent on this Alabama defense. South Florida, if you're looking for a blueprint to some degree, you want to see what South Florida did in that second game. Well, how did South Florida get in a position where it was 14-13 and they had a chance late? It certainly helped that Alabama lost 3 second-half fumbles. But one thing South Florida had going for it is a mobile quarterback. You look, and they had 8 explosive plays against Alabama's defense. They were all runs, though, and 5 of those 8 came from the quarterback. And that's explosive plays, or 12-plus yard runs. Tyler Van Dyke, while he's got more mobility than people would have expected, his longest run so far this season is 6 yards. So I don't like – you're going to have to air it out, I feel like, at least a handful of times. And when I asked Tyler about that, he said, first of all, he acknowledged that. And he said, like, you can't stop trying. If you're going to try 5 times, you might fail 3. But if you can get 2 of them, that can change the complexion of the game. So I just don't know that I see Wisconsin being able to have a 13-plus play drive, and then they have to go score a touchdown, because field goals aren't going to cut it when you get into the red zone.
Yeah, that is obvious. We've seen them have long drives. They haven't always been able to finish them. Be good on third down, continue to be good on third down like they have been through the first two games. And yeah, as you mentioned, hit some of those explosive plays. I think the other thing is don't turn the ball over. Tyler
Yes.
Van Dyke in some of the bigger games that he played at Miami, there were some turnovers there. And running the ball wise where is Tui Walker health wise? And does Cade Yakimelli continue to perhaps get more touches than maybe we expected coming into the season, even if Tui's back? Because I think so far you can make an argument, and it's an easy one to make. Cade Yakimelli's been the most explosive running back they've had so far.
Oh, without a doubt. He broke off a 29-yard run in the last game, and late in the first one, he had a 12-yard run, which was the longest from any running back that they've had. Yeah, I think he's done enough to earn some opportunities, but you got to do something with those opportunities. And you can say that about any of the top three with Ches as well. They need to be more dynamic and explosive. And I know when Phil was talking, he said you'd rather have a bunch of 4-yard runs than a 90-yard run and nine, what did he put it? 9 other runs for 9 total yards. I don't know. I don't know.
I disagree.
If you could get a 90-yard run, that would give you a little bit of a lift. But I do think that Yakimelli will be involved based on what he's done here the first 2 games.
Yeah, I would agree. Do you think they're going to be able to hold up pass rush wise? Do you like and be able to keep Tyler Van Dyke upright to be able to have some success? Alabama obviously has a ton of athletes. They've got 5 sacks in their first couple of games here. What do you think? Because I think at times Tyler has probably taken a hit or two too many.
Well, it's the biggest challenge that these tackles are going to face, obviously the entire line. I wonder if part of this too will be, okay, if you're going to not air it out a ton, I almost feel like this is a situation where you've got to get the ball out quick. And I do think that Tyler has had some success on some of those shorter, but especially intermediate types of throws. I mean, you can win this game hypothetically without a bunch of 20-yard explosives if you can, like you're talking about, move the chains and get 10-yard gains. So I wonder if that's part of the plan too, but it might in part be dictated by how much pressure he's facing. If he's just under duress constantly in the first half, I don't know how you can go into halftime and draw up plays where you're saying, okay, we need to get the ball down the field, but you can't throw it until Bryson Green is 20 plus yards down the field. So I think some of it might be dictated in part by how this game starts.
What does this game plan look like from Phil Longo and the offense in general? Is it going to be a continuation of what we've seen these first 2 weeks? I'm mainly talking about personnel packages and how they're going to approach this. Do you anticipate it continues?
It's so fascinating because I know we talked about this before, how many 2 tight end sets, 2 running back sets they've used. It's entirely different from what we saw a year ago. And Tyler acknowledged as well, like they, just like Alabama has likely been holding some things back. He said they had been holding some things back in the vertical passing game and on the edges. So I think that they'll do a little bit more of that, but he said, we're still going to stick to what our base offense has been. And I don't know how you can do one thing in 2 games and then get to your 3rd game and do something that's totally different. So I think they're going to try and be physical. I just don't know how much success they're going to have.
Yeah, it's a valid point of worry because you just don't know. Put a question in the rundown for you. Name 2 players, not named Tyler Van Dyke, that must have good days for Wisconsin to beat Alabama.
Well, my initial inclination was to say Ricardo Hallman, but I know we were talking before the show about exactly what this looks like. I think it's whoever is defending Ryan Williams. It's very clear from watching his first 2 college games that he's special. He's got over 200 yards receiving and 3 touchdowns and had a huge play to help break that game open against South Florida. We talk about how this defense has not been tested down the field. That's not going to be the case in week 3. So whether it's Nazir Forkurine, and I know he's been banged up, whether it's Ricardo Hallman, we don't know the status of Xavier Lucas. Is it RJ Delancey? I mean, I don't know, but it's some combination of that just because of I think, the challenge there. And I feel like I could say 10 guys, but since you asked for two, I'll go to the offensive side. I'm going to pick Bryson Green. If we're
Okay.
saying all this stuff about deep threats and taking some shots, he's the guy you're going to go to. Will Pauling is steady Eddie, but I'm going to go with Bryson. Can he get one shot over the top where he makes a big play?
Yeah, I mean, you would hope, but look, Bryson Green is not a burner, so this is not going to be. I don't think he's running past Alabama defensive backs. Do you disagree with that? I don't think he's running past. I don't think he's running past him. So really, it's going to be throwing that ball up and saying, "Hey, Mister 50-50, make a play."
Yeah,
more so than him running 5 yards behind the defense. That's not necessarily his game. There were times last year where he had some of that. I think back to the Washington State game where he had a step on a guy, but it wasn't like a huge step, and obviously Tanner Mordecai overthrew him. But that's not necessarily his game. I think maybe Vinny Anthony is part of that. Maybe, and it's not really CJ Williams' game either. I think that they have to figure out a way to get both Tretch and Will, who is a burner, down the field and not just be working the short and intermediate routes.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what that looks like, but obviously we've seen those two guys have the potential to be dynamic. And I'll also be curious to see what the snap count situation looks like for Tretch. He had 17 on offense first game, 18 the second. Do they want to get him involved more because they feel like that's an advantage based on what they've seen in the first two games? Or is this going to be more of a heavy dose of Will Pauling? Man, you could go so many different directions for this particular question because they need to be good in a ton of different areas. And frankly, this is one of those games where you have to have some breaks just go your way. I mean, South Florida, they lucked out to some degree with those 3 fumbles. Now it takes in part to punch the ball out, but like Alabama's on the goal line about to score a touchdown and Jalen Milroe fumbles the snap. And Wisconsin, they don't win in week 1 without a muff punt by Western Michigan that the Badgers just happen to fall on in the red zone. So it sounds like I'm saying they need a miracle, which I don't know. Maybe some people agree with that, but like you do need some of those kinds of breaks just to go your way to give yourself a chance in a game like this.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see if they're able to get that. We'll make our picks for this game coming up here in a little bit. Before we do that, though, before we get to all of our picks, I want to talk about your story from Wednesday. The last time Alabama came to Madison, 1928, when the Badgers were coached by Glenn Thistlethwaite, which is just a hell of a name. Hell of a name. But going through that story, I loved it. I'm a big history buff. I love learning and reading about that. And I'm kind of jealous that you just got to go through all the newspaper.com archives and find all this stuff. But what was your favorite part of that story?
Multiple favorite parts, but it's just fascinating to go back and look at the history of college football in a completely different era a century ago and see that college football was still a really big deal, but the game was so much different. And the things you could get away with were so much different. The first thing that stands out is 5 months before this game, and at the time it was considered to be like one of the big games, one of the biggest intersectional games of the college football season, but Thistlethwaite sent a letter to Wallace Wade, the head coach of Alabama, requesting a no scouting pact because he said 2 things. It was really expensive to go down to Alabama, and if he was going to have to send a coach down there, that coach would need to be there for at least 10 days so he could watch 2 games to get a real feel for what the Crimson Tide looked like. And he didn't want to do that because the Alabama game was sandwiched around games against Michigan, which Wisconsin hadn't beaten in 29 years, and Chicago. And the letter came back with a response from Alabama's coach, and he refused. And he said, part of the reason we're scheduling a game like this is to understand how football is played in other parts of the country, and us not scouting takes away from that. But I thought it was really interesting that he kind of said that I'm not even going to have that much time to scout because we've got 8 other conference games, and the Wisconsin State Journal acknowledged that that was something that could perhaps be taken at slightly less than face value. The other explanation from Wisconsin's coach, by the way, was that, well, if we don't scout each other, it'll be a much more entertaining game because we won't know what to expect and fans will like it more. I just can't even imagine that in today's era. So that was the first story that really stood out, that kind of highlighted like, oh man, this was a much different era. But yeah, it was a very fun time. The student base apparently was not particularly enthusiastic about the football program, to the point that Wisconsin's athletic department officials essentially scheduled an emergency pep rally Friday night before the game at the Red Gym on the second floor. And the entire football team showed up. There were multiple speeches to try and show that there was school spirit. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But there's so many details in that story. People were concerned that Alabama was just going to decimate Wisconsin because their starting center was 208 pounds and all the other linemen were 205 pounds. They've been eating a lot more food in the last century.
They have been. They definitely have been. So I love the entire story. It made me go and look for some other stuff. But you know how we always say never read the comments, like of articles and that type of stuff. I read the comments and I found some fascinating video. I don't know if you saw this comment, but a game from 1928 is available up on this website. They played Chicago. It wasn't the Alabama game, but the Michigan game and the Chicago game from that year are available. And the Chicago game was homecoming. And so not just the game itself, it has sound, and you see the marching bands, and you see like the night before they had a pep rally, they had a big bonfire, and the sound is there as well. And you can hear them doing Glenn Thistlethwaite chants. It's amazing. So that like, I love that type of stuff. But yeah, watching the band, like this is pre Fieldhouse. So like the whole Camp Randall just looks completely different. It was, I loved your story. And again, the ability to go and then watch some of that other stuff yesterday was awesome.
Yeah. And should say Wisconsin won the game 15-0, basically played one of the best games they had all season. I thought it was interesting that the quarterback, who was the team MVP, was a kick returner and had a big kick return in the second half to spark that one. And they also scored points on a drop kick. So, and neither team threw more than 3 passes. Football looked a little bit different 96 years ago, but like the spirit and the atmosphere and the pageantry, it was all there. The governor of Alabama took the train ride in with the team and 200 plus people, and the governor of Wisconsin stopped his political speaking tour short so they could sit together. Like, just as much pageantry 96 years ago as there is now.
Yeah, that was awesome. And just eat those stories up. All right, let's get to our picks for the weekend. All right, last week you had a good week. I believe you went 5-2 last week, though I had a little bit of a question on the Wisconsin game.
Yeah, there's an asterisk on that one.
Because I am an idiot and looked up the wrong, or I just put in Wisconsin, South Dakota point spread, clicked on a Vegas Insider link, and it said 12-point favorites, Wisconsin 12 favorites. So that's a little bit low, but okay. Didn't realize it was a college basketball link from 2 years ago. So either way, the 12 number was wrong. It ended up being, I think it ended up closing to like 17 or maybe 17 and a half. And so they covered if we take that 12 number. They did not cover if we take that 17 number, which is fair here, Jesse.
It's hard for me to go back and retroactively say what I would have picked if it was 17. I'm going to
shut up.
So it's not my mistake. So I'll take
it. Wasn't. Yep. And I gave it to you. I gave you the dub. You're now 9-5 on the season. I'm 6-8. And we have another slate of 7 games here to pick. A couple of top 25 matchups this weekend. And we'll start with this one. Arizona at Kansas State. Arizona ranked 20th, Kansas State 14th. And the Wildcats, the Kansas State Wildcats are favored by 7 in a game between conference rivals. Longtime conference rivals.
We all saw that coming a decade plus ago. Let's see. I've got my little breakdown here. So I'm going Arizona on this one with the 7 points. They've got one of the best wide receivers in the country, Tetroa McMillan. He didn't have big numbers in week 2, but was coming off a game in week 1 where he had 300 plus receiving yards and 4 touchdown catches. So I think Arizona will cover in this one on the road.
It's a good matchup. Arizona didn't necessarily play great in this past weekend. I like Kansas State at home. I like Kansas State at home. All right. Next game is Boston College, ranked 24th in the country, taking on Missouri, who is ranked 6th. Missouri is a 16-point favorite.
Well, Boston College won the shocker of week 1 against Florida State, though it probably turns out the Seminoles aren't very good.
Aren't that good?
And Missouri has not given up a point in 2 weeks. But I think I like 16 is a lot of margin to work with here. So I think Boston College will cover, but I think Missouri's going to win. They're just a fantastic team right now.
Love the defense and think the offense is good enough to get that win. Oregon, 9th ranked. It feels like they're going down in the polls. At Oregon State in the, I mean, they're not calling it the Civil War anymore, are they? Whatever.
Is it a
civil conflict? Civil conflict. Yeah, there you go. Oregon is a 16-point favorite against the Beavers.
Man, I like working with these big numbers. Oregon is not, I mean, they beat Idaho 24-14. They beat Boise State by 3 points. Rivalry games often tend to be closer than what they might otherwise be. I think Oregon wins, but I think Oregon State's going to cover.
I agree with both of those statements. And I look at Oregon State in a similar vein as Washington State and wanting to punish, I guess, for lack of a better term, the teams that left the conference with Oregon and Washington and taking all their anger out on Wisconsin last year. I mean, the chance of Big Ten sucks and some of the other more colorful language that Washington State fans were using when Wisconsin went out there. I think that there's some anger there. So I'm going to say Oregon State covers, but Oregon wins. Notre Dame trying to recover from Thomas Hammock and the Huskies upset last weekend. They're 18th ranked in the country. They're going to Purdue, who's 2-0.
This is a big time game for Ryan Walters. I think they played one game. They're coming off a bye.
What did I say? Did I say 2-0? I meant 1-0. They rolled their opener.
Right. They won 49-0 against Indiana State. I think part of this is Notre Dame is reeling. Part of this is Purdue has now had 2 weeks to prepare for this game. I think that will make a difference. So even if Purdue doesn't win, I think the Boilermakers cover.
Yes, I would agree. Like, do you think last week Notre Dame was that just a letdown after beating Texas A&M, or are they just not good?
That's kind of what I wonder. You can explain, you can rationalize anything, but yeah, they didn't play well enough.
Like, Purdue was picked to finish 18th, I believe, in the conference. Is that accurate?
I can't remember, but it wasn't very high.
Pretty sure it was accurate. Pretty sure I picked them 18th. I'm pretty sure I would assume that you did as well, because I don't know who you would have put down there otherwise. So yeah, Purdue picked it. I don't think one game makes it. I'm going to take Notre Dame in that game, but at West Lafayette, never easy. The other, I guess, conflict game, the Apple Cup, Washington State, technically a neutral site game against Washington, played in the city that the University of Washington is in. That is Seattle. The game being played at Lumen Field, the Seahawks field. The Huskies are 4.5-point favorites in that game. Which, again, a neutral site game. Just want to make that clear.
I'm going Washington State to cover in this one. John Mateer, the quarterback, just ran for 197 yards against Texas Tech. And much like the Oregon State situation, I feel like there is a part there that's just like, you bastards, you left us hanging here, and we want to show that you we're not happy with it. So maybe that doesn't matter, but in my own mind, I like to pretend that it does matter.
I think it definitely matters. And I think Washington State's going to become, just like they did last year, even though they lost, still coming fully loaded for that one. Indiana, in the Big Ten game that everyone was wanting to see, Indiana at UCLA. Indiana finally makes it back to the Rose Bowl.
Man.
Gonna be able to make that joke with so many teams this year. Minnesota among them.
Indiana is rolling here through 2 games.
He's got it.
77 against Western Illinois, pounded FIU, and UCLA in week 1 won by 3 points against Hawaii. So I like what Indiana has going under a new staff. I'm going the Hoosiers go on the road and they win the Rose Bowl. Oh, wait, they beat the Bruins in the Rose Bowl.
They win at the Rose Bowl. You just have to, just throw that at in there and you're all good. I'm going to agree with you. I got Indiana as well on that one. And Alabama, a 16-point favorite at Wisconsin, kick 11 a.m. Badgers looking for a huge upset. This is the biggest spread that they faced at home in more than 30 years.
Is the previous biggest spread Miami in 1989, or is there something in the early Alvarez era?
There were some games against Michigan, I believe, and Ohio State early in the Alvarez era where they were that bigger underdogs than this, but it's close. It's close.
This is a tough number to pick. I think sometimes we are so deep in here that we're just looking at the flaws that Wisconsin has. But I can't help but think, I just don't think the Badgers have the personnel to hang in a 4-quarter game. And maybe there are some points worth out there for it being at Camp Randall. But I think Alabama's going to win 31-14. And therefore, I think the Tide come in here and cover.
I have not actually put a score down. However, and if you've listened to this entire show, maybe this entire week, maybe this entire season, you think I'm Mr. Negative, and you think I'm going to be like the person that says they have no shot. And while I don't think they're going to win the game, I think 16 points at home is a lot. And I think Wisconsin finds a way to cover that 16. I'm not overly confident in that saying and that assumption that they're going to be able to do it, but I think 16 is a huge number, even against this Wisconsin team that maybe has not been overwhelmingly impressive the first 2 weeks. But Alabama was, I don't say they were on the ropes last week, but that was I believe 21-16 game in the fourth quarter. And obviously it ended up being 42-16, but that was a much closer game than I think anybody was expecting. They get a bye next week and they get Georgia the week after. Wisconsin is not the Wisconsin. It's just another game for Alabama. I think Wisconsin finds a way to cover, but we'll see. Looking forward to it. Badgers and Crimson Tide coming up Saturday morning at Camp Randall. We'll be there, and then we'll be back to talk about it on Sunday. Jesse, thank you very much.
Thanks, Zach.
All right, there he is, Jesse Temple from The Athletic. You've been listening to The Camp.